From Washington, DC, welcome to the 129th edition of the Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin and Bob Marks.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
This week's Alumni Show is brought to you by Bill Haughton, insuring standardbreds and farms for over 40 years. Bill knows the ins and outs of equine insurance. Make sure your equine investments are protected. Call or text Bill at 954-655-5547. That's 954-655-5547. Call Bill now.
Hey, Freddie, I heard that Huntington Farms had a great sale. Why don't you tell everybody about it?
Huntington Farms Steve and Cindy Stewart wish to thank all of the owners and trainers that purchased a Huntington Farm yearling at this year's Lexington Selected Sale. Huntington Farm wishes all of you much luck and success with your purchase. Look for the Huntington Farm consignment at the upcoming Harrisburg sale, November 8th through the 12th. For more information, call Huntington Farm at 859-987-3983 or email huntingtonfarm@cs.com. That's huntingtonfarm@cs.com. Joining us today is Harness Racing's PR wizard, Ellen Harvey, and DC top lobbyist, Marty Irby, the CEO of the Animal Wellness Action. Ellen and Marty, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Great to be here with you, Freddie, Trade Bob. Great to be here with you all.
Well, always a pleasure to have you, Marty. Ellen, I'm going to start with you. Ellen, you have been very active in rescuing horses from being exported for slaughter, and now you have a rule change proposal regarding freeze branding being presented to the USTA. Now, can you give us some of the details of that?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on the show. Yes, I'm a USTA member, and as a USTA member, I'm allowed to propose rule changes, as are all our 17,000 or so members every year, for things that they think will make the sport better for the benefit of all. And I have proposed a rule change that will, it's kind of an odd sort of issue because, as you may know, starting with the foals of 2019, so that's the current 2-year-olds, the USTA microchips all those horses as part of the registration process, which is fine. But what they're also doing is phasing out freeze brands and charging a 50% surcharge for anybody who wants to get a freeze brand on their horse. And last year, about 1,200 of the crop of, I think it was 7,500 or so horses got a freeze brand. That's about 18% of it. The issue, and it's not an actual rule. They just took a vote in the registration committee and put this process into place. Now, that affects 100% of horses and 100% of their owners, breeders, connections, and what have you. And what that does for the long term, of course, is makes the horses very difficult to identify really in any situation, but most especially when they end up in this, when and if they end up in the slaughter pipeline, or they end up on Craigslist, being sold by somebody, or any place horses can be sold. The USTA has done a lot of things right over the years, over the last 25 years or so, in terms of enabling horses who can no longer race to have a viable and useful life outside of racing. I mean, Bob Marks was in the breeding business for decades. What were you trying to do? Breed an athletic, capable horse that's able to serve the needs and wants of the people that own them. Well, sometimes they can't do that forever, even if they're very good at it, or maybe they don't have quite the right talent. But they're still athletic, intelligent, capable horses that can be very useful to somebody. However, without that brand, they're very difficult to identify. The USTA has put probably hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 25 years. We sent a demonstration team to the World Equestrian Games. Every one of those horses had a freeze brand. We send horses and demo teams to Equine Affair and horse fairs all over the place. They instituted the Full Circle program, which enables folks who are concerned about a horse's long-term welfare to be notified, to give themselves a way to be notified if that horse ever needs assistance. There's about 15,000 horses in that Full Circle program. Now, other breeds have a similar option. However, all of those other breeds, which are the Morgans and the Thoroughbreds and the Saddlebreds, all the quarter horses, all of them combined don't have the number of horses that we have in the standardbred industry. So that makes it all the more puzzling to me that the USTA would institute this policy, and it's not a rule change. It's not a rule, this policy that hinders those that want to help horses when they are at peril. There's a current rule, this is kind of an inside baseball thing, but I sat down in June to read through the rule book to say, well, they're clearly not going to amend their practices based on the letters and calls that they've gotten and what have you. So we're going to have to propose a rule change. So I sat down and read the rule book, which is 159 pages, by the way, and not all that fascinating reading. But there is no rule that compels this policy. I read it over and over, and there is actually a rule, which is 7.06, for those of you following along at home, that says that no horse shall be allowed to race that does not have a lip tattoo or freeze brand. So you get your choice of one of those two things, and a microchip. That's the current rule, 7.06. Well, it is true that most of the older horses that are racing have one or the other of those, that they are complying with that. They have probably a freeze brand on their neck and a chip. But the 2-year-olds, which are the foals of 2019, don't have that. So it's dismaying to me that, number one, they're not following their own rule. Number two, they instituted this practice without the due process of, this is a democracy to a large extent. We have district meetings and we have an annual meeting so that all these rule changes that are proposed get a full airing. They're just transparent. They're in all the publications. They're on the USTA website. Members can contact their directors and say, I think this is a good one to pass, or I don't think this is a good one to pass, and they take that information with them to the annual meeting. This never got that scrutiny. This was just passed, not even passed as a rule. I don't know what you could call it. The registration committee took a vote in 2018 and declared that in 2019 you wouldn't get a freeze brand. Go ahead.
Ellen, why wouldn't they want to have both, the freeze brand and the microchip?
Well, that's a very good question, and they certainly could do that. And, of course, if you go to the racetrack right now, unless it's a 2-year-old, virtually all horses have both of those. I know that they have an assortment of reasons for that, but the actual real reason, and I worked there for 22 years, is that past connections, breeders, trainers, owners, and what have you, often get phone calls from folks that are trying to help these horses that are in perilous situations to say, thus and such a horse that you used to own or bred is at peril of going to slaughter or being abandoned in the desert in Texas, which is what they're doing with horses that they can't merchandise to Mexico. Would you like to help? And many of those people do want to help. Rod Allen a few years ago got in his horse trailer the next morning and drove to where that horse was in trouble and picked him up and brought him home. But most of them don't. Most of them don't even answer the phone anymore. They hang up. They don't respond to emails, etc., which is fine. They certainly are not compelled to do that. But one would hope that they would not hinder the work of those that do want to help, that do want to get these horses back into the agricultural economy. If you sell a horse to slaughter, which you certainly can do, there's nothing illegal about it, as hard as Marty is trying and many others, you get a few $100s. If you keep a horse in the agricultural economy, the tax store guy is making money, the feed store guy is making money, the vet, the farrier, the people selling horse trailers, et cetera, et cetera. That horse is a tremendous economic engine.
Good morning.
Hey, Marty, would you like to add anything here?
Well, no, I don't know all of the various rules and regulations within the breed, but I think what Ellen is saying makes sense to me. There are so many horses out there that have either had the tattoo cut from their lip or have no identification or marking whatsoever, may not have a chip. I know how many kill buyers are out there that are rounding them up from various auctions and wherever else they may come from and shipping them over the border to slaughter is really a gruesome thing for a horse to have to go through. So if there's any way that we can prevent that horse from going to slaughter by identifying the horse, making it easy for people to buy back a horse they may have bred or raised that they want to give it home for life. I know our good friend Stacey Hancock does that, and I know there are tons of other breeders that are responsible that try to do the same thing out there. I think it makes sense to me that you should have these identification markers to be able to ease that process and keep that horse in the horse industry. It's exactly what she's saying there. So I agree with the sentiment. I don't know all the details of the rules, but that seems logical and for the betterment of the horse to me.
And Marty, also, can you give us an update on the horse slaughter amendment?
Yes. Well, Freddie, you did such a great job joining and helping, and we got that basically an amendment to the INVEST Act, which is the big infrastructure bill, moving through Congress, or rather being fought about in Congress. That passed the House back sometime, I think, the latter part of June, early part of July. We were able to get a provision inserted by a voice vote with no opposition being outspoken and vocal about it, against it, to ban the transport of horses and all other equines for the purposes of slaughter across state and federal lines. When the bill cleared the House, it was sent over to the Senate, and a lot of people don't really, get into the weeds of the legislative process, but basically what happened is the Senate took the bill number and the bill name from the House, and they completely gutted it and just took all of the language out and inserted their own Senate amendment, which was a completely different bill, left with the same bill number and the same name. They, in that gutting of the greater package, removed the horse slaughter transportation amendment, sent the bill back over to the House, and said, this is what we're calling a bipartisan infrastructure package. And we really didn't have much help in the Senate. Senator Menendez tried to keep it in there, but we just couldn't get any of the Republicans to step up and help us at this turn, who have helped us on the horse slaughter issue in the past. So as of right now and late Friday, the House of Representatives is still fighting over whether or not the infrastructure bill will pass. They had to pull it from the House floor. They do not have the votes to pass it, as far as I knew of last night. I haven't checked this morning. But it's very controversial, and now I've read that the president has even come in and said that he's okay with some sort of delay on trying to work things out. So I think that even undermines the bill in the House where it is now. And at the end of the day, it's all up in the air is where we are today, Freddie. Now, tomorrow that may change, and we may have amendments offered in the House where we get to reinsert it back in. Or what I think is more likely to happen is they're going to end up taking whatever two bills pass the House and Senate. They're not going to be alike in a likely scenario, and then they'll have what they call a conference committee on that particular bill. The leaders that are involved in those transportation and infrastructure committees in the House and Senate would get together, work out their differences, and say this is what we've agreed to, and then both chambers pass legislation again. So it's a little bit convoluted. Right now, things are up in the air. We still stand a shot at getting that provision passed and signed into law, but I will say it's probably a long shot at this point in the game.
Yeah, didn't you bring in a senator to help you guys?
We did. We actually did. We just hired at Animal Wellness Action former U.S. Senator Mary Landrieu. She was a very, very moderate Democrat from Louisiana that served in the Senate for 2 terms. I believe she served in the Senate when President Biden was in the Senate as well. She has been a tireless champion for animals. She loves horses. She's an avid horse rider. She led the SAFE Act when she was in the U.S. Senate and was the leader of that bill. She's helped us on numerous horse issues, and so we're elated to have her on board helping us.
Oh, great. Ellen, is there anything else that you would like to add? I know you have some co-sponsors. You might want to give them credit, too.
Yes, absolutely. I have Keith Gisser, who is a standardbred owner from Ohio, who is also involved in rescue, but he's in reptile herpetology rescue as well. So he, however, understands the legislative process and all those kinds of nuances that can make such a big difference with animals. And this is one of those. I guess the most important thing, the take-home message is those, and my other co-sponsors are Sabine Spring, who's very active in retraining horses for their second careers, and Trish Soulsby, who's a standardbred owner from Ohio as well and quite passionate. But all of us and many hundreds of other people, we're not anti-chip. We're just pro-brand. There's a benefit to the horse of both. The microchip, you can take a horse's temperature. You have to be 6 inches away and have the $279 scanner, but there's a lot of benefits to both. So why wouldn't we give them both of those benefits? All they have to do is do what they did for 25 years, which is put a brand on horses and add a chip. It's quite easy. And we're now in the season where the USTA district meetings are taking place, and those of your listeners who are USTA members, the U.S. Trotting Association, I would urge them to call those who represent them in their district and tell them, keep the brand. Add the chip, but keep the brand.
All right. If you're buying or selling your home, Joe Rico is your go-to guy. Joe has been representing buyers and sellers on Long Island for 30 years. He is an expert in all types of sales. Don't settle for average. Call or text Joe Rico today at 516-524-4870. That's Joe Rico at 516-524-4870.
Give everybody Joe's email address.
That's Joe Rico, C21 at yahoo.com.
Freddie, tell all our listeners about Crawford Farms.
Crawford Farms, breeding the best to the best so that you can race the best. The Crawford Farms consignment will be selling at the Lexington Selected Yearling Sale on October 5th through the 9th. For more information, please visit Crawford Farms' website at crawfordfarms.com. Ellen and Marty, thank you so much for being our guests this week. We really appreciate it, and you guys are great.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap for the 129th broadcast of the Harness Racing Alumni Show. On behalf of Trade, Bob, and myself, thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune in next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show